Hey everyone, we're just going to wait another minute to let people enter, and then we'll get started. All right, good evening and welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Shani from Greenlight, and I'm thrilled to host tonight's event with Henry Hoke launching his new book, Sticker. He'll be talking with Will Arbery with a performance by musical guest Cassandra Jenkins. So you're in for an excellent time. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to Henry, Will, Cassandra, and the team at Bloomsbury Academic for making this happen, and to all of you for showing up. Although we're not able to host events in our store spaces, our community of authors and readers is still here. Just a couple of housekeeping things. In our Zoom webinar tonight, you can see and hear the speakers, but they can't see or hear you. They can see that you're here though, and there are a couple of different ways you can interact with the authors and with each other throughout tonight's event. The first is the chat, which you can find by clicking on the icon that looks like one speech balloon. You're welcome to post your comments and thoughts there. If you have a specific question you'd like to have answered by the author, please post that question in the Q&A module, the icon that looks like two speech balloons. We'll only be pulling questions from there, so make sure to put them there. I'll remind everyone in the chat as well. Tonight's featured book Sticker is available for purchase from Greenlight Bookstore. You can shop in person from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. at both our Fulton Street and Flatbush Ave locations, or you can order online at greenlightbookstore.com for a quick pickup or for shipping anywhere in the US. I'll be dropping the buy link in the chat as well. As a special thanks for attending tonight's event, we're offering 10% off the featured book. Enter the coupon Greenlight Events 10 in the coupon discount section at checkout online for 10% off. Henry is stopping by our store to sign copies of the book, so you can get a signed or even personalized book by request while supplies last. Thank you, Henry. Make sure to indicate your signed copy request and order comments at checkout by midnight tonight, or look for signed copies when you visit the store. So our musical guest tonight is Cassandra Jenkins, native New Yorker and veteran musician. She writes with a singular voice and an impressionistic intimacy, making astute observations that dovetail neatly with her blend of folk and lush ambient pop. Our interviewer tonight is Will Arbery, a playwright and screenwriter from Texas, Wyoming, and Seven Sisters. His play, Heroes of the Fourth Turning, was a Pulitzer Prize finalist and received numerous accolades and awards. He's a member of the New Dramatists and the winner of the Whiting Award. He most recently served as an executive consultant on HBO's Succession. Will be speaking with our featured author, Henry Hoke, author of The Groundhog Forever, the story collection Genevieve's, and the Book of Endless Sleepovers. He co-created and directs the performance series Enter Text and lives in New York City. In his new book, Sticker, part of the Bloomsbury Academic's Object Lesson series, Hoke employs a constellation of stickers to explore queer boyhood, parental disability, and ancestral violence. Henry's going to start us off with a reading, or actually an intro, and then we'll hear from Cassandra and then a Q&A. So please take it away, Henry.
Great. Thank you so much, Shani. And thank you to Greenlight. It's my nearby bookstore here in Brooklyn. And it's amazing to be appearing here. Thank you so much to Kathy and everyone at Bloomsbury for setting this up and for all the support they've given Sticker. Yeah, I encourage you to buy a copy, use that discount. All the royalties that I make from this book are going to be donated directly to the Jefferson School African American Heritage Center in Charlottesville, Virginia, my hometown. It features in the book, and it's a big part of preserving a lot of history and legacy and building community in Charlottesville in our current moment and moments to come. So that's where that money will go. Yeah, I'm gonna just do a quick intro and then introduce Cassandra's performance, and then I'll do a reading and then we'll do a Q&A. So I did ask, I asked Bloomsbury, here's my book cover, which is just phenomenal, by Alice Marwick. But I asked at one point in our production process if we could get the parental advisory explicit content sticker somewhere on the cover. So I had Bloomsbury ask the Recording Industry Artists of America, RIAA, if we could use it, and they said absolutely not. So I ended up buying like a set of just ones that I found online that I could use, and they were very interesting and kind of bootleg. And the one I chose to stick in my own copy says parental warning, extreme hope ahead. And so I thought that was fitting. I'm feeling very a mix of hope and despair about the world. But I had to cancel in-person events or postpone them until March. So this is my event, and it's virtual, and I'm so glad y'all are here. But I have hope that we'll see each other again. And what also gives me hope is just to be joined tonight to celebrate by the presences of Cassandra Jenkins and Will Arbery. I've known these amazing artists and people for a long time now. I've known Will since he was a boy, a teen, and we've worked together, we've taught together, and we've shared a lot. And just his work is incredible. And Cassandra I've known for a long time. I've seen play so many different shows and so many different iterations. And I think I moved back to New York City in the fall of 2019, and two of the most incredible things I experienced were, one, Will's play Heroes of the Fourth Turning, which I was able to see, and then also that winter I saw Cassandra play a show where she debuted songs from the upcoming album that has now come out to much accolades, an overview on phenomenal nature, and just those two things made me feel really affirmed being back here. And then the pandemic hit and it all changed, but I carry them with me, and just the experiences of them. And being able to watch Will's play on Zoom when they did it was incredible. And then hearing Cassandra's album when it came out got me through so much of the year of writing this book, finishing this book, and releasing it. And so I'm overjoyed to share. Cassandra is here tonight in t-shirt form. This is an incredible, both nostalgic and celebratory t-shirt for Cassandra Jenkins. But Cassandra is on a flight to a last minute tour opportunity, which she'll talk about. So she recorded her performance last night, and I'm gonna share my screen to share it with you. So here's Cassandra Jenkins to play music, and then I'll come back and I'll read a chapter from Sticker for y'all.
Hey there, I'm Cassandra. Thank you to Henry for inviting me to play tonight, and to Greenlight for hosting this. I'm going to play a couple songs from my record called An Overview on Phenomenal Nature. And thank you again. This is launching me. I'm about to go on tour with Australian artist Courtney Barnett, and this is sort of my launch out into the world. So thank you. This is a song called Michelangelo. I'm a three-legged dog working with what I got, and part of me will always be looking for what I lost. There's a fly around my head, waiting for the day I drop dead. My DNA looks pretty strange. Can you see it on my breath? You're a virus and you come back at the first sign of weakness. Treatable, not curable, and I'm building up a resistance. since I was young, far too young to know the role I was given. And I'm Michelangelo, I carved myself out of marble when I don't know how to grow flowers out of arrows. I'm a three-legged dog looking for what I lost. Thank you. I have one audience member in the room tonight. You can applaud, it's okay. This is a song called Crosshairs. All I want is to fall apart in the arms of someone entirely strange to me. In your eyes I see the panoply of all the people inside me. What is it you're looking for in the looking glass? It's in the crosshairs of a stranger's stare. I'm lost at last. All I want is to fall apart in the arms of someone entirely strange to me. In your eyes I see the panoply, all the people inside me. Empty space is my escape. It runs through me like a river, while time spits in my face and turns us like stones into drifters. Entirely strange to me. In your eyes I see the panoply, all the people inside me. All I want is to fall apart in the arms of someone entirely strange to me. In your eyes, I see the people inside me. Thank you again for having me. I'm Cassandra Jenkins, and enjoy the rest of the event. See you soon, I hope.
All right. Thank you so much, Cassandra. That made me weep. So my book is a memoir constructed in 20 stickers, and I'm going to read one of them. And that sticker is anarchy. I could never decide where to place my anarchy sticker. It came as a freebie with some mail order CD Club shipment, my subscription long canceled before they could charge me the initial fee. It stayed on a stack of whatever's in my closet, that unruly red A, edges breaking the bounds of its red circle, making the sticker itself sharp. I couldn't stick it on the Wu-Tang skateboard I hadn't learned to ride because it'd make the Wu-Tang W part of a wah or an aw. Plus the Wu symbol was already its own act of revolt. I couldn't stick it on the electric bass guitar I hadn't learned to play because my Barely band was a metal band. Our only recorded song was called Hell Maggots because a boy I wanted to impress told me to write a song called Hell Maggots. It wasn't punk at all. It was romantic. My anarchy was already expressed on a white t-shirt I bought at the mall. The back of the t-shirt had "Punk's Not Dead" in black letters. On the front was the huge red anarchy symbol. I wasn't pulling it off. The A felt wrong on the soft, mom-washed cotton. The symbol was not meant to be commercialized and contained. It was meant to spill out and stretch over some besmirched public surface. If you scratched the sticker in my closet, it would smell nothing like spray paint. I was the cleanest kid, a freshman. David Berman, a former Charlottesville resident and UVA radio DJ, once sang, "Punk rock died when the first kid said, 'Punk's not dead, punk's not dead.'" But a few years before he sang that, I showed up to early morning marching band practice in my fucking anarchy t-shirt with my long hair wet and my tired brain miserable. If anarchy was a scratch and sniff, it'd smell like a bloody nose mixed with morning dew on fresh mown grass, trampled by the shiny white parade shoes I always forgot to bring to football games so that my alternate would have to march in my place. Our director stood on a ladder above the field and blared orders through his megaphone. "Henry and the clarinets would like you all to know that punk's not dead. Punk is not dead, everyone." When the entire marching band laughs at you, it's time to change your wardrobe. "Punk's not dead" got relegated to sleep shirt status, government overthrow neatly tucked under sheets and snoring. My literal punkness only expressed itself once a week and only late at night. Every Thursday around 1 a.m., I'd wake abruptly and turn on my boombox. The new local alternative rock station had a show called Ska Punk's No Losers, and I'd tune in and crouch by the volume dial, keeping it on the lowest setting. Mom had hearing like the bats that would sometimes erupt out of the basement and flap around our dining room. Home was getting hard. Mom and I were growing more and more alike and going for throats. Freshman year was the final full year I'd spent in her house, forever our home. Near the end of our time together, I shaved my head and kicked off 2 decades of bad hair days. The late Thursday nights would wreck my Friday mornings, but they belonged only to me. I'd rest my head on the bookshelf under the stereo to the whispered shouts of Operation Ivy and Kids at the Black Hole. I didn't need to set an alarm for Ska Punk's No Losers, and it wasn't restless adolescence that pulled me awake in time for the show every Thursday. It was Running Man. Anarchy is when things take an unexpected turn. I woke up around 1 a.m. on Thursdays because there were footsteps pounding the street outside my bedroom window, to the dead end, then back up, a loud run. In my grogginess, it sounded almost inhuman, but I knew it was actually a living legend. Everyone had heard of Running Man, a buff UVA grad who ran upwards of 100 miles each week, often in the latest night or earliest mornings, even in freezing weather. He ran all over city roads and country roads and had been running for most of my lifetime, fearless, a simple, singular identity, not like the bumper stickered cars he avoided by running so early, so late. I was the opposite of a runner. It took me ages to make it around the track because I hated the way the impact made my ridiculous, fragile body feel. If you see me running, someone is chasing me. But I'd close my eyes those nights and continue to hear his pounding shoes, close my eyes and imagine I was him, filled with the churning freedom of tearing up and down every road in Charlottesville. If Running Man was a scratch and sniff, he'd smell like moonlit air at midnight. Running Man was the kind of local character that a college town cultivates, like the woman downtown who dyed her hair bright colors and dyed her 2 huge dogs to match, or the tall woman outside the coffee shop who all the cruel teens called a man. But those characters were hyper-visible. I'd never seen Running Man. My view of the street was blocked by our living room, so I didn't bother pulling open the shutters when he went by. My experience of him stayed strictly auditory. It seemed like I was the only one who'd never eyed Running Man in the flesh. Friends would tell stories of driving home late from parties and him scaring the hell out of them, hustling the other way or blazing past them at a stop sign. One friend paused a movie and hushed everyone to listen to the slap of Running Man's shoes on the pavement outside his house. "It's Running Man, holy shit," he squealed, our sad sack party suddenly charmed. "Have you seen this guy?" He stood up and play acted as Running Man, describing and demonstrating the full body run, holding his arms out like wings. He took off his shirt. Running Man was famously shirtless, clothed only in short shorts in all seasons. His facial hair was usually unruly and expressive, dangling from his chin and flapping in the wind. I could almost picture it. Then another hush. Running Man ran back by, breathing heavily and making a hup hup noise. We all gave our ears to him. The sound of Running Man continued to haunt my late nights for a spell, but then his route shifted and my sleep cycle went back to somewhat normal. I grew out of the memory of him, moved away and replaced him with a million New York City characters. In my late 20s and early 30s, I began having diurnal sleep patterns, waking up in a panic in the middle of the night and surging with insomnia until the early morning when I could quiet my mind and sleep in. When I started waking up, Running Man returned to me. I sometimes thought I could hear him going by outside, even in Los Angeles or some other faraway place. A goofy association. I'd picture him as described to me and smile. By all accounts, his presence spread joy. People in town would cheer him on or high-five him or shout encouragement. At the tail end of December 2015, I was staying in my in-laws for the holidays. Their house is also in Charlottesville, north of town in a quiet subdivision. I had a diurnal night, an abrupt wake up, probably around 5 a.m., not too early, but I couldn't get back to sleep. I was more frustrated by the restlessness because we had a day trip to Washington, D.C. planned, and I knew I'd have to get my shit together and be out at museums and zoos in the winter weather all day. I watched the hours tick by angrily, and a little before 7 a.m., I heard the familiar sound of feet slapping the pavement. Oh fuck, it's Running Man, I thought. And because this was our hometown, I had hoped that it was really him, still at it. I knew I had to finally see the guy. I got out of bed in my pajamas and hustled downstairs, grabbed a top coat from the hall closet and threw it on, and went outside in the frost and fog and stood barefoot on the chilly porch. And there was Running Man, as described, short red shorts and topless. He had a knit cap on and wild gray goatee, thick, jacked legs. He wasn't running. He was just standing at the end of my in-laws' driveway. I waved and he turned and ran, lifting his knees and swinging his arms in that legendary way. I knew he was running toward a dead end. He had to come back by. I thought of going to grab my phone to take his picture, but I got worried I'd miss him. I waited a minute. I got cold and went inside and watched from the window, but he didn't return. In the summer of 2019, I was staying in my old room at Mom's house. I was conceptualizing this book, and I looked in my closet and found my little anarchy. There still wasn't a place to stick it. I saw my young punk self in the same mirror. So many things remained, but the boombox was gone. I picked up my phone and queued up the miraculously depressive album that David Berman had just released after a long hiatus. Earlier that week, he died by suicide in Brooklyn, where I was preparing to move. I lay down in the same old bed and remembered Running Man. I Googled him. The first page of results was all news headlines, many containing the word mourn. On the morning of December 29th, 2015, the same morning as our encounter, Running Man was struck by an SUV and died. I scrolled back through the photos on my phone to confirm the date and found shots of DC art galleries of upset animals at the zoo. The news story I opened cited the time of the collision, around 7 a.m., eerily close to the time I saw him, only it happened on a stretch of road southwest of town, 8 miles away from my in-laws' house. When I began this chapter, I didn't know it was a ghost story. Thank you. And now I'd like to welcome Will Arbery, the amazing Will Arbery. Hello.
Hey. Man, that was so cool. Cassandra's performance and your reading. It's such a good book, Henry. I love it so much.
Thank you, Will.
Yeah. I can't wait for everyone who's here to read it, to tell all their friends to read it. It filled me with such like intense nostalgia, and a very, sort of like complicated nostalgia at times. Also, I also grew up in the South and have a, complicated relationship to it. But I think we'll talk more about nostalgia later, but even hearing you read just now filled me with a really intense nostalgia, because it just like the quality of your voice, the beauty of your writing brought me back to being like 16 at the University of Virginia Young Writers Workshop, which is where I met you. And I was a camper and you were a counselor, and you and Merkel were like the coolest people I'd ever encountered. And of course, so yeah, just like your voice just now, the objects in the book, like the stars on the ceiling, the gold stars in the classroom, the parental advisory sticker, like you talked about, like there's so much that it's like, it's a really beautiful reading experience. And I think anyone who has grown up in this country, but especially like, in the 90s, will like really, really relate to it. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about Charlottesville, and I'm excited to talk about nostalgia. But first, I would just love to hear how this book came about, and the series that it's a part of, and also why you chose stickers as your object.
Yeah. Well, so since, they started coming out, a number of years ago, especially my local bookstore in Los Angeles, Skylight, I would see these amazing object lessons books. And they had an event where they sort of simultaneously released a couple of them. It was, Hood and Doctor. There were a couple early ones. And I just love the idea. I think I've always been drawn to really hybrid nonfiction, which is the idea that like this is a series where every author takes a completely different object and takes a whole different approach, and they can really use their voice to write the book. And that was what excited me so much. And I love nonfiction that really plays with deeply diving into one thing. I sort of cheated by like taking a bunch of things, but the other ones are really just these incredibly exhaustive and beautiful and personal pieces of book-length essays. And it's just really what I'm into. It's like my favorite thing to read. So I was like, you know what, maybe I'll take a shot. And I initially pitched a different object, and they were like, that object's taken, but we like what you have to say. Chris Shaberg, one of the wonderful editors of Object Lessons, was like, I really like your angles. So like, is there maybe something else we can pull out from your object knowledge?
What object was that? What was
the first one was disc. So I was going to do 3, and it wasn't, so they did a compact disc book, which was already under contract. So, I haven't read it, but I should read it. I'm going to read it. But at first I was like, a little mad, but that was compact disc, and mine was going to be disc, and it was going to be 3 essays, one about laser discs, one about CDs, and one about DVDs. And 2 of those pieces ended up basically in this book. But I transmuted it. I was like, okay, well, sticker. I have a tactile, because I was really thinking about dead media and obsolete media and things like that. And I'm like, well, stickers really decorate, like objects and really connect to that idea of like sort of being a millennial, an older millennial, and having a lot of pre-digital experiences, but then carrying them into this new world and having that, sort of crossover. And also just what that crossover is for wisdom and knowledge, and like what we gain and how we look back and we see what were the signifiers because that's all we had in a way. We didn't have the connectivity, right? Instead, we were like, okay, well, this is our little world, and this is how we order it, and we order it with identity, and we order it with stickers. And so that really became what I decided. And I was like, well, I can write 20 stickers, and I'll do a memoir and 20 stickers, and that'll be the pitch. And so I did, and thanks to the goddess, I was able to write it.
Were there any? How did you narrow down the 20 stickers, and were there any ones that you left on the cutting room floor?
Yeah. Well, so I pitched it with 10, and all of those are in the book. I did like a bust sticker for Thomas Jefferson, but I ended up doing Rotunda instead because that's just more ubiquitous. It's his building in Charlottesville. But besides that, the original 10 are in here. So then when I got the contract, I was like, okay, shit, I got to think of 10 more. and so I did eventually figure out 10 more. It took a while because the pandemic had just hit, and I was a little bit, paralyzed by that. But I think the biggest part of it was that, well, at one point there was a fun sticker that I was going to put in, which was like a best-selling, like a #1 bestseller or something.
Mm-hmm.
It was going to be like a meta chapter about books, and it just got a little bit too unruly. That was one, like, it didn't end up working, and I didn't share it in any way. But there's two that I thought would be in it, but then they became just little small parts of it, which are the I voted sticker and the coexist sticker. So they get sort of mentions and shout outs, but I think they just kind of opened up a little bit too broadly for what I was doing, my own experience, especially with the city of Charlottesville. Although those stickers obviously are very common in like a neoliberal city. But I think the last one I really had to think about was that, I started writing this, I pitched it in 2019, but I started writing it in earnest with the contract in 2020. And I was like, how do I keep the pandemic out of this book? Because it was completely invading my mind. Every day I was thinking about that. And I was like, okay, I really want this book to stop in 2019. I want it to, because I'm accessing my entire past. I'm doing it through this very selective, distinct way with each sticker, but each sticker, even this one I just read, it contains multiple eras and dates throughout it. Yeah. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to bring the pandemic in. But then every time I went out in, mid to late 2020, there were stickers. There were stickers on the ground outside the school showing where the kids had to stay spaced apart. There were stickers in the windows of establishments. There were the QR code stickers that the restaurants had built. New York was just completely it was a sticker boom. And I just kept thinking about it. So that's like a sticker that, I wasn't ready to write about that, but maybe someday, I'll do a little, I have these custom stickers I've been putting in the books that I get my hands on, but maybe I'll have a sticker that's actually a chapbook about pandemic stickers or something that I'll make as an appendix to the book for lucky readers someday.
Yeah, please do sticker too.
I could.
And also there's this lovely refrain in the book where each sticker gets to have this sort of double life, as if it were a scratch and sniff, and what that would smell like. I just thought that was a lovely touch. So Charlottesville, is a huge, there's forays into New York and other places, but really so much of it is about the history of Charlottesville, the schooling, rezoning, all sorts of really really complicated, fascinating stuff. But there's a sentence that really stuck out to me, where you refer to the now demolished dorm, where I learned to reclaim the word queer as a theory, as an incantation towards sense making, belonging. And that was just because that was it's the perfect summary of what my experience was, at the Young Writers Workshop, at Tuttle. I remember that queer theory class. For me, going to Charlottesville from Dallas was a life-changing experience. It was for years after Charlottesville stood in for openness and acceptance and progressivism, it stood for that for me. It was the bridge to going to a liberal college, just and then for the events in 17 to happen, you know, the Unite the Right rally and the death of Heather Heyer, it was, I mean, it was complicated for me, and it's like even exponentially more complicated for you as the author of this text. And so, yeah, I mean, I just thought, you know, maybe we dig into, you know, our confusing journeys in the South a bit. And I guess like one of the first questions I wanted to ask was like whether just like the nature of nostalgia, and whether whether there can be, whether, you know, sort of whether like trauma can be a part of nostalgia, whether it can like be in conversation with it. Because I think when we think of nostalgia, we think of you know, it's very fuzzy and warm, and we tend to think of it as positive. But can there be a sort of like ambivalent nostalgia? Because it feels like so much of what you're doing in this book is going back and digging and clawing at parts of your past and finding out what was actually going on underneath all of it.
Yeah, well, amazing question, and this is the big topic we're opening up. I'm excited for all of it. I think I mean, what I say in the book, you know, is I talk about my nostalgia never being for the real thing, you know, and I use that, you know, like you say, I use scratch and snips as like a refrain to have fun with each sticker and think about what the aroma would be if it was a scratch and snip. But there's a chapter about actual scratch and snip that's also about nostalgia, right? And it's the idea that like I can remember these smells and scents and what they bring up, but that nostalgia is really complicated, and that, you know, I remember, you know, watching videos and VHS tapes of my childhood, but not exact moments in the same way, you know, and it's all this filtration. But I think with Charlottesville and with my relationship to it now, I just spent a month there basically. I was there for a long time. I was going to launch the book there in person, but I canceled my event. But I was walking around in downtown Charlottesville over the last week, staying across the street from where they've taken down the Stonewall Jackson statue, and then walking through the park where they've taken down the Robert E. Lee statue. So these really powerful things to experience. But this idea of like all these signifiers in sticker form, sort of revisiting them and thinking about them for this book, but then also just like being in the same spaces, whether it was like my mom's house where the story I just read somewhat takes place, and where I was, you know, recently, the same room, these things, these places. I really feel like I kept thinking about how, you know, my nostalgia, I think I'm sort of addicted to nostalgia. I think it really is what I connect to more than anything else. But it's not a positive. It's not like it's not like a rosy, rose-colored view of anything, or like things should be like they were. But I think I really am just intensely experience those moments where a lot of memory washes over me, an experience I've buried or forgotten, and it's very tied to trauma, I think. And in a way, I'm like, okay, well, I'm experiencing this that maybe was awash in trauma, or in pain, or in frustration, or in like identity, especially like being a queer person, obviously from the South. Like I think like there's a lot of things where I'm like, well, I was going through a lot that I wasn't able to articulate, and being in those spaces again, but having the perspective I have now really shifts it. And I think it's that sort of I think it's that intersection that really makes that makes nostalgia valuable to me, is that we can really see what we were and what we are now, and they sort of butt heads in this really strange way. I mean, I love the idea of thinking about young writers, which is the Young Writers Workshop is a writing program for high schoolers in all different genres, and they come from all over. Obviously, you came from Dallas, but I was going there. My mom like came and did my laundry on the weekends because I was, you know, 2 miles from my house when I was there in this dorm at UVA, where you know, my parents were both employees at UVA, and I grew up in Charlottesville. For those who don't know that, but yeah, so that was really interesting for me because it was still obviously like a very it was an amazing space, and it wasn't a space that was identical to Charlottesville itself, but it was a space where there was like, you know, right from queer education, people like Jenny Johnson, who taught an incredible class on queer theory, to, you know, that was very accessible to high schoolers who were just being introduced to it, who might have been called queer a lot, but didn't know how that was reclaimed or even a genre or a way of thinking. And then but building that community in that space was incredible. But I also loved what happened with seeing a reflection from without on Charlottesville. And I love that you had that experience in Charlottesville, that it was a place of, you know, of community and of openness and of it was almost an oasis for that little bit of the summer. But I would hear these, it was really be funny to see how people were like, Thomas Jefferson's a really big deal here, huh? Like just seeing how people viewed things, even like people talking about like, I don't know, I conflate this a little with people being in other cities where Young Writers is now, but kids going to a pawn shop and coming back and talking about it being the jewelry and gun store. They're like, there was this jewelry and gun store. I don't, but just, I guess, like, because Charlottesville to me was something that wasn't investigated, like it was just where I was from and everything was what it was, and I think what's incredible about spanning so many eras from being like an older millennial and then like through into the digital era and into our contemporary times is just how like it really is about reckoning, like it's about reckoning with everything you thought or felt and how you were guided through life and what that meant and what that ever meant and what these signifiers, whether they were stickers, whether they were experiences with class and race and friendship and pain, all those things, how they change when you look back on them and when you revisit the same spaces. And when you see something like the tragedy and the terrorist attack, and that happened in Charlottesville, light up a lot of people around the globe's minds about what this place might be and what it might represent, and think, okay, well, yes, but no, and no, but yes, I think is what I kept thinking. I was like, well, everything they're saying is important to talk about and investigate, but it's not the reality, and I don't even know the reality. So let's see how I can somehow represent what that is. And that's why there's so much ambiguity. And I think that's really what nostalgia is for me, is all those intersections commingling and sort of cycloning into something unique. And that's what the book is,
Yeah. And the you have that really great line about like, it's the fake shit that endures. Referring to often to like these stickers or these like objects that have, they're not biodegradable, but they also, they're a portal for you to the real shit, that like they take you right there. And one of those, you talked about reckoning, and one of the things that I thought was really, bracing and great to see you get into, you talk about like your ancestors in Alabama and someone, an ancestor who helped enact Jim Crow laws. And I wrote a piece last year that was about the shared last name with Ahmaud Arbery, and how my father's white family has its roots in Georgia around where Ahmaud Arbery lived. And so just that was an incredibly just paralyzing, confusing thing that I'm still like investigating and working through. And so I was just curious about like how you found that history out, whether any of it was like how much digging you had to do, what that process was like for you, and what literal steps you took to uncover that history.
And I love that piece, and I think it is so important to think about. I mean, I wrote a lot of this, or I was really getting into the writing of it during the uprising in June of 2020, and those murders and Black people in America. And I think I was really thinking about that is a big part of being like a white Southern person, is that like your names might be shared by contemporary Black Southern people because they were enslaved by your ancestors, and it's just a wild thing to reckon with and consider. The thing with so this is the Bankhead family that I'm from. It was really not a secret or anything I had to unearth at all, but it's really interesting how it came about. Again, almost all of my extended family is from Alabama. My parents are mostly they mostly lived in Alabama and grew up in Alabama. And many of my family are still there, and it's it's a place I've been a lot, and I have a lot of love for it, and it's but in a way, being in Virginia, being in Charlottesville, I was pretty removed from it. And I would go visit I have a great group of cousins, and I would go down there, and I have an amazing grandfather and grandparents who have a lot of connections to Alabama and who are still there. And my grandpappy just died, but a couple weeks ago. But I've been thinking about him a lot, and I think just incredible people who had a lot of kindness and community. And this was the person we're talking about. Well, you know, the Bankheads were a political family. The famous Bankhead, Tallulah Bankhead, who was my cousin, who was sort of the, you know, wayward artistic person, more representative like what me and my generation have been able to do, living in cities and doing theater and art and writing. But her uncle was a senator in Alabama, and basically the way I really reckoned with this was that I didn't hear about him too much. You know, he's my great great grandfather, so he had died many years before I was born. But he, my cousin, who I mentioning my cousins earlier, he did an amazing spoken word, you know, storytelling piece, sort of like a Moth style piece about how he did his master's in education in Philadelphia, and he was teaching in public schools, and one of his professors was like, okay, well, just Google your family. Go like Google your family. And basically all it took was a Google, and my cousin saw, it's on his Wikipedia, that basically, and it was recently after Ava DuVernay's Selma film came out, the test, there's a moment where there's like a verbal test that Oprah has to take, and it clearly is shutting her out of voting. You know, she's going to register to vote, right? The character played by Oprah. And she's just shut out of voting by this incredibly racist, you know, moment of being asked impossible questions, impossible parameters for a Black person to get registered to vote. And those tests, you know, in Alabama were enacted specifically by my great great grandfather and, you know, people at that time, which is the idea that like when the grandfather clause expired and it was like Black people might be able to vote, it was like, well, let's make it impossible for them to vote. So that's an incredibly upsetting thing to reckon with, you know, and to think, okay, well, you know, segregation was always the mission, white supremacy was always the mission. And the thing is, it's like I have that acutely in my lineage because these are politicians. You know, my family hasn't been in politics in that way and for a very long time, for generations. But this was hardly specific to my family, you know, and it was very clearly, and I talk about it as being relevant very much to Charlottesville and the moments where there was massive resistance against school integration, and all these things being enacted with this entire you know, organized white supremacist voter disenfranchisement, and the fact that we're still fighting, you know, at the moment losing battle for voting rights. At this moment, it just seems like there's this really universal reckoning that has to happen. So I think like the fact that it's on the Wikipedia was what was, you know, amazing. Like for my cousin, it was like, okay, because he had grown up like this was a guy, and, you know, this was a prominent Alabama politician, and he did a lot of good things for white people, you know, I mean, like, and for, you know, infrastructure and for communities that at the same time. So there's this very complicated relationship that of course my, you know, ancestors and older family members have to the people they loved and who they were in community with and how they were represented. But for me, it was like, yeah, I didn't hear too much about it until this spoken word piece, and I loved hearing that. So my cousin Kent is an amazing writer and educator and professor. But that was when I was really like, okay, yeah, it's amazing to look back at these parts of our families. And I had a conversation with Shaki Jackson, who's a friend of mine in Los Angeles, about this specific thing, and she was sort of like, oh, well, you know, you should write about that. And I was like, oh yeah. And so that was really the beginning of this book, I think, was that chapter. And the chapter is called Gold Star, and it talks a lot about my education essentially, and how it was both about segregation and, you know, and especially in relation to Charlottesville and the history of the Jefferson School, which was a school for you know, emancipated Black people, Black youth, and how I was there for a little bit when it was closed and all the eras of it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, and if I'm not mistaken, it's one of the longest chapters. It really sticks with you. Yeah, and the gold stars, of course, referring to, you know, like on like a teacher's like tally of who gets a gold star and all of that. Yeah, and you talk about segregation disguised as achievement. And yeah, I'm curious about that too. Like what the, you know, more rooted in your experience in Charlottesville, like, yeah, just a little bit about what that process of realizing that that's what was going on. Like when did you start to put that together?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is it was really in waves, and it was in how even having the language to talk about it was, you know, this is a thing that's part of, and again, this is the idea that, like, you know, you are labeled as gifted at some point, and that has so much more to do with your economic privilege, the space and time you have, the educational materials you have access to, whatever it is. I mean, it's always completely connected to white supremacy and a white supremacist country. And so there's no real way to like separate those two things. But this idea that tracking to honors classes, things like that, college bound things, like all these kind of tracks. There was a ProPublica article that tracked Ziona Bryant, who was one of the organizers the original petition maker to remove the Lee statue from the park in Charlottesville, was featured in this article. And it was about how, young Black women had different journeys through the Charlottesville public school system. And so much of it was like how you get tracked into these like extra, normal curriculum gifted programs that give time for art and things like that, and self-expression and whatever, and sort of get keyed back into a later tracking into gifted and talented classes or honors classes or AP classes. And that's all really like something that I think, in high school, we definitely had a lot of conversations about it. Given that we're not blind, and we're experiencing a school that is in many ways segregated, and we have some classes with majority Black kids and we have some with white kids, and we're like, what's the difference and what does this mean? And it was something we would talk about back then. But I think until I'd really experienced the amazing archival and community work that the Jefferson School, that's now a historical center and community center in Charlottesville, the restored space, until I'd really been there and seen how they've archived it and they've tracked it. They've shown every era of when there was like massive resistance against integration, and each different thing that was enacted that sort of built these white supremacist institutions in Charlottesville. I think it didn't all come into a clear perspective. And that's why things like that are so important, I think. I mean, obviously, I think it's why critical race theory is one of the most, it's so, I don't even want to get into it just now, but the fact that it's a flashpoint is like, well, it's an incredibly, it's very fundamental and important. And obviously this book intersects with it quite a bit in just viewing that there are systemic structures that create the racist systems we experience. And that's something that we didn't have the words for, but that we were experiencing and we were talking about. And back then we called it tracking. We just talked about tracking a lot. In high school, we would, we'd be in with meetings with, liberal groups of friends or in classes and just think about what's happening with tracking. It's like, why are we tracked like this? Why are all the white people tracked in this certain way? And like only some Black people get tracked to be like in this certain, trajectory, right? Yeah. And so, yeah, it really is. I think why the book, there's a lot of, obviously a theme of education. And we've talked about it in different ways, from our career education as young writers to like, being and getting gold stars in high school and what that means, elementary school and what that means. But I think the theme of education is really important to this book because I think that we are all having a very, very long education in this country, and we are all, and I want to support everyone as we learn things. I guess that's what's so important to me, is just fundamentally like letting people be, giving people access to learning from each other and from people who have experienced things instead of from people who like have decided to codify that experience into some kind of power structure. And I think that's a big fight right now. It's a fight in Virginia. So it's an important thing for everyone to pay attention to, but not to get sidetracked by just the ugliness of the right, of just like the idea of like dismissive anti-wokeness, all these things where they commodify our language, progressive language, leftist language, and turn it into something derogatory. I think just they're going to be incredibly ugly. But what I think is important is just to keep our focus on who's being affected by it and keep learning and keep, dismantling that part of ourselves that still doesn't understand or still is unwilling to understand or accept or reckon. Yeah. And I'm on that journey, and every white person I know should be and is on that journey. So I want to welcome more into it because, that's important. Anyway.
Yeah, yeah, totally. No,
long answer.
So many, no, it was great. And yeah, I think the book does such a good job of again, just like sort of chipping away at what that time was and what those things were that were sort of all around you that you took for granted. Like one detail that really popped out was it's just wild, but how everyone would refer to Lee Jackson King Day, which was a sort of which was Martin Luther King Day, but with Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson tacked onto it, Lee Jackson King Day, and just how normalized that was, everyone referring to it as that. and the justification being that all three were defenders of causes, which is just like, it's just like, I mean, yeah, that where something like that is normalized, you know, is sort of taken for granted. Like, it's a long road to like, I mean, there's just so much that it takes like time to see again. Yeah. Anyway.
I mean, that's what I get so much of from your work, is just this idea of like, of how indoctrination, especially of language, is such a fundamental part of our upbringings and how we access and engage with politics and become agents of whatever force, you know, in the world. And I think, like that idea of like, normalizing language, co-opting language, drawing from anything to serve a certain cause, to like justify and even make abstracted white supremacy or something, you know, to abstract it into like the theoretical. I think that's a really powerful force. And I think for me, I'm like, well, let's get kind of literal and object based. That was really important for me to sort of order this. And I didn't know where it would go. I didn't know where a lot of these essays would go, but I just kept going there, and I kept trying to keep the pandemic out and keep but still keep the moment. And, you know, there's references to the 2020 election, but, you know, it's still like, I really had to limit how far I was taking things, but still hold that chaos inside and put it in the book, you know?
Yeah, I can imagine that it would be something that you just started seeing everywhere, like you mentioned. Like once you see it, it's everywhere. And hard to structure it, but you structured it so beautifully. I mean, we only have a few minutes left, but if anyone wants to ask a question, now would be very much the perfect time. There's like a little box that you could do that in.
Please ask questions. I'll be really short with my answers, I promise.
And I'm so happy that you read that chapter about the Running Man. I mean, that I'm just a total sucker for ghosts, and so that was like that was the chapter that, I mean, not to pick a favorite, but it probably was my favorite. Just such an amazing ending. There's no question attached to it. I just can't believe it. I can't believe that you saw the Running Man on the day he died.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still reeling from it, and I went over and over it, but I think well, I wanted to read it for you because you I think of you as a ghost story person. I remember probably the best text I've ever sent was to you, by far. I think I probably tweeted it because it was so good, but I texted you, what did the ghost say to your sister before she pushed her down the stairs? Like, I just tweeted that to you one night. I'm sorry, I texted that to you one night because that's a thing that we would converse about. What did the ghost say to your sister before she pushed her down the stairs? And so I think of you when I think of ghost stories. And I mean, I changed it up at the last minute to read that one. I'm glad you responded to it.
Yeah,
you were in my heart.
I just thank you. Well, I mean, oh man, I just remember being at the UVA Young Writers Workshop and telling, you know, ghost stories for the kids on like the last night, and that was really where I like perfected the art of stories that were true, but, you know, I perfected the embellishments that made them. I mean, I think of the oh, go for it.
I just think of the ghost story in my book as like the sound in Heroes of the Fourth Turning. I just think of like, there has to be something so haunting and destabilizing. I mean, this was real, and that felt real, you know, like that it really just, I think it opens up like we talked about the stickers being portals, but that opens up a portal into consciousness where we're like, okay, so reality is, you know, fragile, you know, and that's important, I think. And I just love that. I love how you did that in that play. And
oh, thanks. I mean,
I was inspired to do it here.
Yeah, I think about ghosts all the time. I don't know why. It's just the lot I've been given in life, but like, I've started to think of them as unexamined history, or like, you know, like fractals of unexamined history, like things that we have to keep thinking about, things that we haven't moved past yet, even if we thought we did, you know.
Absolutely.
So it makes sense that the South would be a ghost-filled place. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I'll recommend this book, Ghostland by Colin Dickey, fellow CalArts grad. but just an incredible book with that exact thesis, which is just that like, it's not about like, are ghost stories real? It's about like, why are these ghost stories from these places resonant or lasting? Where did they emerge and how do they relate, especially to the history of, you know, we'll say white supremacist violence in America. So it's pretty amazing of a book, Ghostland. Yeah, that's one to check out too, that I thought about a lot when writing this book.
Thank you. I want to listen to your cousin's story too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'll send it. I should probably she could find a way to put it in the chat, but I'll send it out.
We did it.
Yeah.
You did it, and you did it so well. That was such a great discussion. Thank you so much. And everyone seemed to like it too. Thanks everyone for posting in the chat. This was a great conversation, and Cassandra's music was so beautiful. I really enjoyed it. I hope everyone did too. We know that they did. I just said that. I'm going to post in the chat one more time the buying link. Make sure to use Greenlight Events 10 for 10% off, and support Sticker, especially knowing where that money is going. That's such a great cause. So everyone have a great night. Thank you so much.
Wonderful night. Thanks, Will, and thanks everyone.
Thanks, Henry.